In November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus and within weeks destroyed what remained of two entire armies on the banks of the Volga. They were not German armies. They were Romanian. Romania had sent more soldiers to the Soviet steppes than any other ally of Nazi Germany, 464,000 men at its peak, surpassing Italy, Hungary, Slovakia, and Croatia combined. No other Axis country sacrificed as much. Marshal Ion Antonescu was not dragged into the war. He chose it. He called it a holy war. And for more than 3 years, Romanian soldiers fought, killed, and died with a conviction that surprised even the German officers who commanded them. Approximately 300,000 Jews died in territories under Romanian administration during the war, in what historians call the Holocaust by bullets. Romanian troops did not merely obey German orders. They initiated pogroms, carried out mass deportations to Transnistria, and actively participated in massacres. The Romanian Jewish writer Mihail Sebastian, who survived in Bucharest, recorded in his diary the mixture of terror and bewilderment at seeing his neighbors become perpetrators. The scars that forged an ally, Romania between the two wars. On June 26, 1940, at 10 in the morning, the Soviet government delivered an ultimatum to Romania. The deadline was 24 hours. The demand, the immediate evacuation of the Romanian army and administration from Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. There was no room for negotiation. The Soviet Union had just partitioned Poland with Nazi Germany and was now extending its hand toward southeastern Europe. King Carol II, who had ruled through a royal dictatorship since 1938, desperately turned to German diplomats. Berlin's response was cold and definitive. Romania had to yield. Führer Adolf Hitler had no interest in defending a country that was not yet his formal ally. Carol II ordered the army to withdraw without a fight. What followed was an unprecedented humiliation in recent Romanian history. Between June 28 and July 2, 1940, Romanian troops withdrew from territories that had belonged to the kingdom since the end of the First World War. Bessarabia, a region of more than 44,000 square kilometers with a predominantly Romanian population, came under Soviet rule. Northern Bukovina, a province Romania had received after the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918, met the same fate. The retreating Romanian army suffered attacks from pro-Soviet civilians and from advancing Red Army troops who moved faster than agreed. Soldiers were disarmed, some executed. Witnesses described the withdrawal as a procession of shame, but the humiliation did not end there. On August 30, 1940, through the Second Vienna Award, Hitler and Benito Mussolini forced Romania to cede northern Transylvania to Hungary. This region, which Romanians considered the historical and geographical heart of their nation, was home to a mixed population of Romanians, Hungarians, and Germans. The loss was devastating emotionally and politically. In less than 3 months, Romania had lost territories totaling more than 100,000 square kilometers and a population of millions. The combination of these two losses triggered a political crisis that swept away King Carol II. The protests in the streets of Bucharest were violent. General Ion Antonescu, newly appointed prime minister, seized the chaos to force the monarch's abdication on September 6, 1940. His son, the 19-year-old Michael I of Romania, ascended the throne. But real power fell to Antonescu, who proclaimed himself conducator, a Romanian term meaning leader, deliberately echoing the semantics of the German Führer and the Italian Duce. Antonescu was a career military officer born in Ploiești in 1882, trained at the military school of Craiova and later at the Higher School of War. He was irascible, demanding, and deeply anti-communist. During the First World War, he had served as Chief of Staff to General Constantin Prezan, and in 1922 he was appointed military attaché in Paris, where he cultivated an ambivalent admiration for France and a growing conviction that the interwar European order was fragile. When he returned to Romania in the late 1920s, he began courting far-right groups, including the Legion of the Archangel Michael, the most powerful fascist movement in Eastern Europe outside Germany and Italy. The Legion of the Archangel Michael, founded in 1923 by Corneliu Zelea Codreanu, combined ultranationalism with an orthodox Christian mysticism that distinguished it from German Nazism but converged with it in biological anti-Semitism and contempt for liberal democracy. By 1938, it had hundreds of thousands of active followers. When Antonescu took power in September 1940, the Legion, also known as the Iron Guard, initially participated in government, creating the so-called National Legionary State. But the coexistence was brief and bloody. In January 1941, the legionaries attempted a coup that Antonescu crushed with the support of the regular army, and crucially with Hitler's acquiescence, as he preferred the orderly Antonescu over the chaotic and fanatical legionary guards. The result was that Antonescu consolidated absolute personal power with a regime that combined military authoritarianism, institutional anti-Semitism, and a deep ideological alliance with Nazi Germany. On November 23, 1940, Romania signed the Tripartite Pact and formally joined the Axis. It was not merely a strategic calculation to recover lost territories, it was also a declaration of values. Anti-Semitism in Romania was not an import from Berlin. It had roots dating back to the 19th century when Jews were excluded from full citizenship for decades. In the interwar period, anti-Semitic political parties proliferated. Universities adopted quotas limiting Jewish student enrollment. In 1938, Carol II's government had revoked the citizenship of tens of thousands of Jews by decree. What Antonescu did was radicalize and systematize an impulse that already existed in Romanian society, now amplified by the myth of Judeo-Bolshevism, the widely disseminated belief, actively promoted by state propaganda, that Soviet communism was essentially a Jewish conspiracy, and that the war against the USSR was simultaneously a crusade against Bolshevism and against the Jews. With that ideological framework, with the army reorganized, and with the German promise to recover Bessarabia and northern Bukovina, Romania awaited Hitler's signal to launch the largest military campaign in its history. The Holy War, Operation Barbarossa and the Eastern Front, 1941. At 3:15 in the morning on June 22, 1941, German forces crossed the Soviet border along thousands of kilometers. From the very first minute, Romania was also at war. It was not a symbolic gesture. The Romanian army deployed that same day more than 325,000 soldiers organized in the Antonescu Army Group, which operated under nominal Romanian command but in close coordination with the Wehrmacht. General Petre Dumitrescu commanded the 3rd Romanian Army on the right flank. General Constantin Șupercă led the 4th Army on the left flank. Both formations had spent months reorganizing and re-equipping after the blows suffered during the 1940 crisis. They were not perfect troops. They lacked modern armored vehicles, heavy artillery, and sufficient motorized transport, but they were motivated with an intensity that would surprise even the most skeptical German officers. The difference compared to the other Axis allies was evident from the first days. Italy declared war on the Soviet Union on the same June 22nd, but its troops did not begin fighting on the Eastern Front until several months later. Finland waited until Soviet bombings of its cities provided the pretext to enter the war on June 25th. Hungary took several more days. Only Romania was present from the very first dawn without needing provocations or additional excuses. The conducator Ion Antonescu had called this war holy in his speeches to the nation. For the soldiers who crossed the Prut River in the early hours of June 22nd, it was not a metaphor. The immediate objective was to recover what had been lost 1 year earlier, northern Bukovina and Bessarabia. For many Romanian soldiers, the war was not abstract or ideologically cold. They personally knew those lands. They had grown up hearing the names of the rivers, villages, and cities. When the 4th Army crossed the Prut and began advancing toward Chisinau, they encountered Romanian-speaking populations who welcomed them with genuine emotion. War correspondent George Oda described scenes of elderly women kissing the hands of officers in Bessarabian village streets that the Soviets had hastily abandoned, but that same advance carried something much darker. From the first hours of the campaign, Romanian security forces began operating behind the front in what official terminology called cleansing the terrain. Instructions circulating among mid-level commanders spoke of eliminating communists, saboteurs, and agitators. In practice, these terms were applied almost exclusively to Jewish communities in the recovered territories. Antonescu had issued specific directives in this regard. The Judeo-Bolshevism ideology, the equation between Judaism and Soviet communism, was not only propaganda, it was state doctrine that officers were required to execute. What happened in Yasi between June 28 and June 30, 1941, brutally embodied that doctrine. Yasi was Romania's second largest city, with a Jewish community of several tens of thousands that had been established in the Moldavian region for centuries. Accusations of signaling Soviet aircraft and of Jewish snipers, mostly never proven and largely invented, served as the trigger. Soldiers of the army, gendarmes, police, and Romanian civilians attacked the Jewish quarter of the city. Testimonies from survivors described executions in the streets, in interior courtyards of buildings, and in the yard of the prefecture. Survivors were packed into sealed railway wagons. Those trains circulated for days with thousands of people crammed inside, without water, without ventilation, in the heat of late June. When the wagons were opened at stations, bodies were counted by the hundreds. The total number of victims of the Yasi Pogrom and the subsequent death trains is estimated between 13,000 and 15,000 people. Writer Mihail Sebastian, who that same year wrote in his diary about the anti-Semitic laws that prevented him from publishing, practicing his profession, or appearing in the credits of his own works, recorded the horror coming from Yasi with a mixture of shock and the anguished feeling that it could happen to him in Bucharest. The military advance continued rapidly over the recovered territory. In July 1941, the 4th Romanian Army entered devastated Chisinau. By August, all of Bessarabia was again under Romanian flag. Romanian troops advanced northward and reconquered the cities of Bukovina. Antonescu then received a proposal to stop at the pre-1940 borders. He rejected it without hesitation. With Hitler's approval and arguing that the war must continue until the Soviet threat was definitively eliminated, he ordered the army to cross east of the Dniester River into territory that had never been Romanian, toward what would become Transnistria. The decision to continue beyond the Dniester transformed the nature of Romanian participation in the war. Until then, it could be argued that it was a territorial recovery war. Crossing that river turned Romania into an occupying power in Soviet territories, and with that status came new responsibilities and new crimes. The next major objective was Odessa. The most important Soviet Black Sea port, with more than 600,000 inhabitants in peacetime, was defended by 3 concentric rings of fortifications built during the previous year. The siege began on August 5, 1941, and would last 73 days. Most ground operations fell to the 4th Romanian Army. The Germans assigned only support units and heavy artillery. In all practical senses, it was a Romanian battle. Frontal attacks against Soviet trenches cost hundreds of dead per day during the moments of greatest intensity. Soviet defensive tactics included night counterattacks that recovered positions taken during the day, forcing the Romanians to restart the advance each dawn. The Ukrainian summer, dry and dusty, with daytime temperatures exceeding 35 degrees Celsius and dropping sharply at night, added additional physical punishment to combatants on both sides. Romanian soldiers advanced through sunflower fields, where the bodies of fallen comrades had lain for days, unable to be recovered under fire. A Romanian general staff officer who visited the front in September 1941 described in his diary forward positions where soldiers had been unable to sleep more than 2 or 3 hours at a time for more than 2 weeks, relieved only by equally exhausted units. Rations were insufficient. Water was scarce in some sectors. Romanian artillery ammunition was insufficient to counter the fire of Soviet naval ships. General Nicolae Ciuperca was removed from command of the 4th Army on August 27, 1941, partly due to his repeated complaints about the lack of German support and unsustainable losses. He was replaced by General Iosif Iacobici. The rotation did not change the tactical reality. Attacks continued, casualties accumulated. When Odessa finally fell on October 16, 1941, after the Soviet garrison evacuated by sea, 110,000 soldiers and 15,000 civilians transported in ships that Axis aircraft could not stop, the city streets were nearly empty. Central buildings had been mined before the withdrawal. Several booby-trap explosions killed Romanian officers and soldiers who entered buildings in the following days. The total cost of the siege for the Romanian army is estimated at around 90,000 casualties, including dead, wounded, and missing. It was a figure equivalent to several complete divisions annihilated to take a single city. The massacre that followed the explosion of October 22nd at the Romanian headquarters in Odessa, in which General Ion Glogogeanu and 60 other officers died, developed with a systematicity that distinguished it from the improvised excesses of the Yasi Pogrom. Antonescu's orders were explicit regarding retaliation ratios: 200 communists for each officer killed, 100 for each soldier. Execution unit records show that the victims were mostly selected from the Jewish population of Odessa without any proof of connection to the attack. The bodies of thousands of people were burned in warehouses on the outskirts of the city in the Dalnik area. Others were hanged in public squares and left hanging for days as a warning. The most conservative estimates place the victims of the Odessa massacre at 25,000 people. Some estimates reach 34,000. Romania formally negotiated with Germany the administration of Transnistria through an agreement signed in Tighina on August 30, 1941. The territory, approximately 40,000 square kilometers between the Dniester and the Bug rivers, with a population of about 2 million people, Ukrainian, Jewish, Bessarabian, Romanian, Greek, Bulgarian and German, came under civilian Romanian administration headed by Governor Gheorghe Alexianu. It was a region devastated by combat, with destroyed infrastructure, unharvested crops, and cities where the Germans had previously carried out mass killings of Jews before the Romanian administration arrived. What Romania built in Transnistria was a system of ghettos and concentration camps that followed a logic of extermination through exhaustion. Deportations from Bessarabia and Bukovina began in the autumn of 1941. Tens of thousands of Jews, including the elderly, women and children, were forced to walk for weeks toward the interior of Transnistria in what survivors described as informal death marches. Those who collapsed from exhaustion were shot on the spot. Those who reached the ghettos of Balta, Mogilev Podolski, Tulchin, Berezovka or Bogdanovka found barracks without heating, without drinking water, with food rations calculated to stay at the threshold of survival. The winter of 1941 to 1942 was one of the coldest of the century in the region, with temperatures regularly dropping below -20 degrees Celsius and -30 degrees Celsius. In Bogdanovka, the deadliest camp in Transnistria administered by the Romanian Gendarmerie between December 21, 1941 and January 1, 1942, Romanian and Ukrainian auxiliary units massacred approximately 54,000 Jews in 1 week. Victims were burned alive in stables or shot in groups near ravines along the Bug River. The Wiesel Commission of 2004 documented this episode as the largest war crime committed by Romanian armed forces during the entire conflict. Romanian troops also assisted German Einsatzgruppen, SS units responsible for mass executions, in their operations in Ukraine and Crimea. In several cases, Romanian infantry and gendarmerie units formed the cordons surrounding Jewish communities before Germans carried out shootings. In others, they participated directly in the killings. The level of involvement varied by place and time, but the pattern is sufficiently consistent for historians to speak of active complicity rather than mere passive subordination to German orders. At the same time, the Romanian Mountain Corps troops, commanded by General Gheorghe Avramescu, elite forces trained for combat on rough terrain, advanced through southern Ukraine toward Crimea. The siege of Sevastopol, the major Soviet naval fortress at the southern tip of the peninsula, involved significant participation of Romanian units alongside German divisions. Crimea was finally conquered in July 1942 after months of fighting that soldiers would remember as the most intense they had ever experienced. By then, the Romanian army had fought for a full year under conditions that no other Axis power except Germany had faced continuously. German commanders, who at the beginning of the campaign had expected more from Finland and less from Romania, revised their assessment. The Antonescu army group had exceeded initial expectations, but the successes of the first year carried a cost that Bucharest headquarters were still not calculating precisely. The best human material of the Romanian army, veteran officers, experienced non-commissioned officers, and soldiers who had fought in Bessarabia, Odessa and Crimea, was being consumed at a rate that replacement classes could not sustain. The divisions that would march toward the Don in 1942 would in many cases be second-line troops, with less training and cohesion than those that had taken Odessa 1 year earlier. The price of loyalty, the Stalingrad disaster, 1942 to 1943. In the summer of 1942, Germany launched Case Blue, its offensive towards southern Russia and the Caucasus. The objective was to cut Soviet oil supplies, capture the Baku oil fields, and bring the war to a favorable conclusion before Soviet industrial capacity and American support could decisively tilt the balance. For that campaign, the Romanian army contributed more soldiers than any other Axis ally. General Ilie Stefler, new Romanian chief of the General Staff since early 1942, organized the mobilization and deployment of a contingent that reached its peak in November 1942, 464,000 soldiers at the front, including 83,300 stationed in Transnistria. It was a colossal effort for a country of approximately 16 million inhabitants. The Third Romanian Army, under general command of Petre Dumitrescu, was deployed on the northern flank of the Stalingrad front along the Don River. The Fourth Romanian Army, partially reorganized, covered the southern flank. Both formations occupied extremely long positions with scarce anti-tank artillery, obsolete armored vehicles, and divisions that in some cases defended fronts up to 40 kilometers wide, with forces designed to hold 1/3 of that extension. Romanian officers repeatedly warned their German counterparts that their positions were unsustainable if the Red Army launched a massive offensive. General Dumitrescu sent reports detailing Soviet troop concentrations north of the Don. General Stefler presented his concerns directly to the German command. The warnings were ignored or minimized. The High Command of the German Southern Army underestimated Soviet offensive capability and believed the Romanians were exaggerating their difficulties. On November 19, 1942, at 7:30 in the morning, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus. After several days of artillery preparation described by witnesses as a continuous roar audible dozens of kilometers away, Soviet tanks broke through the Third Romanian Army lines on the northern flank. The frozen ground facilitated armored movement. Romanian positions dug into frozen soil at -20 degrees Celsius collapsed within hours in the sectors where Soviet concentration was greatest. The following day, November 20th, a second Soviet force attacked the southern flank where the Fourth Romanian Army was stationed. In less than 72 hours, the two Soviet pincers closed at Kalach on the Don River, completing the encirclement of the 6th German Army of Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus inside Stalingrad. The two Romanian armies had been the entry point of the largest encirclement of the war. Romanian casualties at Stalingrad and its surroundings were catastrophic. It is estimated that the Third Army lost about 75% of its combat strength. Tens of thousands of Romanian soldiers were taken prisoner. Others died during the retreat across the snowy steppe. Survivors returned to Romania with accounts of abandonment. Promised German reinforcements did not arrive in time, anti-tank weapons were insufficient, and when the front collapsed, retreating German units occupied trains and trucks, leaving Romanian soldiers on foot in the cold. The relationship between the Allies deteriorated after Stalingrad. The Germans blamed the Romanians for failing to hold. The Romanians blamed the Germans for not equipping or reinforcing them. Retreating German soldiers were photographed pushing Romanians off trains and ejecting them from shelters. General Stefler submitted his resignation in August 1942 after being insulted by Antonescu over the performance of the General Staff, although he did not carry it out. He would submit it again in April 1944, also without definitive result. The Stalingrad episode had another consequence that took months to become visible but proved decisive. King Mihai I, who in 1941 had openly supported the anti-communist crusade and even complained that Antonescu prevented him from visiting the front more frequently, began distancing himself from the conducator. The massive defeat, the treatment Romanian soldiers received from their German allies, and the growing perception that Germany could not win the war planted in the young monarch the seeds of the betrayal that would germinate 2 years later. Despite the disaster, Romania continued fighting. In 1943, it maintained 110,000 soldiers in the Caucasus and Crimea. Its warships escorted Axis convoys in the Black Sea. Its ports handled Turkish chromium required by German factories to manufacture high-quality steel. And the oil from Ploiești continued flowing toward the Reich. Germany's dependence on Romania had not diminished. It had become more urgent as the overall military situation deteriorated. Blood in the Prahova Valley, the oil that fuels the war. Before the war, the oil fields of the Prahova Valley produced about 3% of world oil. That modest figure concealed a geopolitical reality of first magnitude. For Nazi Germany, which had no significant domestic hydrocarbon sources, Romanian oil was the literal fuel of its war capability. The Ploiești refineries processed most of that production. The city, with about 100,000 inhabitants in 1940, was dominated by distillation towers and chimneys burning day and night. The smell of crude oil permeated the air for kilometers around. The refineries, Columbia Aquila, Astra Romana, Standard Petrol, Concordia Vega, were industrial complexes several kilometers wide each, with storage tanks, pipelines, railway tracks, and thousands of workers in continuous shifts. Along the Danube River, barges loaded with refined oil sailed north toward the heart of the Reich. The Allied High Command understood early the strategic importance of Ploiești. In June 1942, the 15th Air Force of the United States carried out a first bombing raid that proved ineffective. On August 1, 1943, the Americans attempted their boldest attack up to that point, Operation Tidal Wave, in which 178 consolidated B-24 Liberator bombers flew at low altitude, some below 30 meters above rooftops, toward the refineries. The operation was a disaster for the attackers. 54 aircraft were shot down, 532 crew members were killed or captured, and 5 pilots earned the Medal of Honor that day. The refineries were damaged but not destroyed. The systematic air campaign began in earnest in the spring of 1944, starting on April 4th of that year, when the United States 15th Air Force, under the command of General Major Nathan F. Twining, began sustained attacks. Romania entered a new phase of the war. American bombers attacked by day. British and Soviet bombers mined the Danube at night to hinder river transport of oil toward Germany. The Royal Air Force focused on the Iron Gates Pass near the Serbian border, the bottleneck every barge had to cross. The Soviet Air Force attacked the Danube Delta branches. The first major attack on Bucharest on April 4, 1944, caught the capital unprepared. The railway station was crowded with refugees fleeing the northeastern front. The bombs killed 2,942 civilians and left 2,126 wounded in a single day. That was only the beginning. Between April and August 1944, American bombers destroyed 157 locomotives, 619 passenger cars, 3,010 freight wagons, and 1,525 tanker cars. Civilian material damage was enormous: 7,600 dead, 7,600 wounded, and 46,523 houses destroyed. By June 1944, aerial coordination between Soviets and Western allies had reached a notable level. A bombing line dividing Romanian airspace was established. Everything west of the Budapest-Ploiești-Bucharest-Constanta line was assigned to the US 15th Air Force and the Royal Air Force. Everything east was assigned to the Soviet Air Force. The combined objective was simple: deprive German panzer forces of fuel before summer ended. Romanian anti-air defenses, strengthened by years of preparation, came under increasing pressure. The Romanian Air Force lost so many pilots and aircraft in battles against American bombers that in August 1944 it decided to suspend fighter operations, reserving remaining aircraft for the expected Soviet offensive. On August 18, 1944, in the last combined German-Romanian air effort, the defenders managed to shoot down several bombers but suffered unsustainable losses. Oil was also the central argument that Adolf Hitler used in his final meeting with Antonescu, held between August 5 and 6, 1944, at the Wolfschanze, the Führer's headquarters in East Prussia. Surrounded by his general staff, the two dictators debated the strategy to defend Romania. Antonescu argued for an immediate withdrawal to the so-called FNB line, Focsani Namoloasa Braila, a defensive position 90 kilometers wide crossing the Focsani Pass, the natural gate toward the Wallachian Plain. Hitler refused. The Führer knew that losing control of the terrain meant losing the oil, and without oil the war was lost. He ordered the advanced positions in Moldavia and Bessarabia to be held. It was the last time the two leaders met. On March 4, 1944, the Soviet High Command, Stavka, launched a spring offensive from Ukraine that surprised the command of the German Southern Army Group, both in speed and scope. In less than 2 weeks, tanks of the Second Ukrainian Front captured Vapniarka, a railway junction in Transnistria barely 50 kilometers from the Dniester River. On March 15th, the German Army Group A, soon renamed Army Group South Ukraine, took control of Transnistria, the territory Romanians had administered for nearly 3 years. On March 18th, Soviet troops crossed the Dniester into northern Bessarabia. 8 days later, they crossed the Prut into northern Moldavia, without the Romanians being able to organize coherent defense. Forces of the First Ukrainian Front pressed simultaneously from the north. On March 26th, the city of Chernivtsi, regional capital of Bukovina, fell without combat. For Army Group South Ukraine, the situation was critical. The advanced front had disintegrated and the road into the Romanian interior seemed open. The Romanian General Staff ordered on March 15th the remobilization of the Fourth Army to defend national territory. But with most of its troops still in Crimea, the Romanians initially could commit only one army corps and an improvised armored group. The Soviets advanced faster than the Romanians could organize a defense. Joseph Stalin and Stavka identified Iasi, regional capital of Moldavia, and Chisinau, capital of Bessarabia, as the main targets of the new offensive. The logic was clear. Capturing these two cities would prevent Axis forces from organizing a solid defensive line blocking the Foxani Pass, the gateway to the Wallachian Plain where Bucharest and the Ploiești refineries were located. If both cities fell, the Antonescu regime could collapse even before the Soviets reached the country's heart. Soviet and Romanian diplomats began meeting secretly in Stockholm to explore the terms of a possible armistice. But Antonescu refused to allow those conversations to reach any result. He still believed Germany could stabilize the front and that yielding to the Soviets meant the destruction of everything he had built. On April 8, 1944, the Second Ukrainian Front under General Rodion Malinovsky, born in Odessa in 1898, an illegitimate child who had fought in the First World War, the Russian Civil War, the Spanish War, and on all fronts of the Great Patriotic War, attacked southward into Moldavia, targeting Iasi. At the same time, Soviet forces launched a separate offensive to recover Crimea. On April 10th, Odessa fell, finally convincing Hitler to order the evacuation of Crimea. Evacuated troops arrived in Constanta on the Black Sea, disoriented and demoralized, unable to contribute effectively to the defense of Moldavia. The Army Group South Ukraine, reorganized with the German 8th Army, the German 6th Army, the Romanian 4th Army, and the Romanian 3rd Army, managed to stabilize the front around April 17th. The hilly terrain of Moldavia and Bessarabia, very different from the flat Ukrainian steppes, favored the defenders. The Romanian railway network, called in official propaganda the Second Army, still functioned with remarkable efficiency, allowing rapid troop and supply movement. Roads, turned into mud by spring rains, slowed Soviet advance as much as German and Romanian resistance. The Soviets tried to retake Târgu Frumos on May 2nd, but German panzer units and Romanian infantry stopped the attack after a week of fighting. It was a tactical Axis victory that bought time to reorganize defenses and build 3 lines. The Dacia line at the front, the Trajan line as the main position, and the Decibel line as a fallback position. Tens of thousands of Romanian civilians, including Jewish labor detachments organized in segregated work groups by order of the Romanian General Staff, dug trenches, anti-tank ditches and concrete bunkers during the summer of 1944. On May 26th, Stavka ordered the indefinite suspension of the Romanian offensive and transferred a tank army to Belarus for Operation Bagration, which would begin on June 22nd. But the pause in Romania was only that, a pause. Stalin was already planning the decisive blow for the summer. The collapse, the Second Iasi-Chisinau offensive, August 1944. On August 19, 1944, the two Soviet fronts began probing Axis defenses along the Iasi front and the Dniester River. These were not casual reconnaissance attacks. They were the prelude to what Stavka had prepared for weeks, the largest Soviet offensive in the southern sector of the front during all of 1944. The Army Group South Ukraine, commanded by Generaloberst Johannes Friesner, recently transferred from the Baltic where he had commanded Army Group North, knew the attack was imminent. Friesner himself wrote to the Führer expressing alarm over the political situation in Romania and requesting centralized command of all German forces in the country. The request was rejected. Adolf Hitler ordered the advanced positions to be held. Friesner had little room for maneuver. His armored forces had been reduced to a minimum after transfers to Belarus and other front sectors. Where there had once been 9 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions, in August 1944 only 3 remained, all far below their theoretical strength. On August 20th at 5:15 in the morning, artillery of the Second Ukrainian Front opened fire on Axis positions north of Podu-Iloae and northwest of Iasi. The bombardment lasted almost 2 hours. Telephone lines connecting frontline units with their headquarters were cut within minutes. The Romanian 5th Infantry Division, which had launched its own counterattack 45 minutes before the Soviet bombardment, was caught in the open and practically annihilated. "The air was burning," recalled years later a Romanian second lieutenant who survived the first day of the offensive. The tanks of the Soviet 6th Tank Army advanced behind a rolling artillery fire curtain, under the cover of 1,952 aircraft concentrated by the Soviets over the breakthrough sectors. The roughly 300 German and Romanian aircraft available could not match such superiority. By 12:30 p.m., elements of the 27th Soviet Army had crossed the Bahlui River, one of the Axis defensive axes in the Iasi area. By 1 p.m., the road to Iasi was open. The Romanian 7th Infantry Division collapsed. The German 76th Infantry Division, threatened with encirclement, had to retreat. By about 3 p.m., soldiers of the 52nd Soviet Army entered Iasi from the northwest. Antonescu flew from Bucharest to Bacău to meet General Gheorghe Avramescu, acting commander of the 4th Army, and General Otto Wöhler, commanding the German Wöhler Army Group. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Avramescu and his officers advocated immediate withdrawal to the FNB line. Antonescu and General Elis de Flea were not yet ready for such a drastic decision. Wöhler opposed any retreat and demanded counterattacks. While the generals debated, the front continued collapsing. The Third Ukrainian Front under General Fyodor Tolbukin attacked simultaneously from the Chitkani bridgehead on the Dniester. The Romanian 4th Mountain Division disintegrated within hours. The German 306th Infantry Division suffered losses of up to 1/3 of its infantry before the 37th Soviet Army crossed from the bridgehead. With no reserves available in the area, the right flank of the German 6th Army was exposed. On August 21st, Axis counterattacks failed one after another. The Romanian 1st Armoured Division, organized into 2 battle groups reinforced with German assault guns, fought desperately but could not close the gaps opened. The Soviet 18th Tank Corps stopped the counterattack of the German 10th Panzer Grenadier Division and destroyed the forward elements of the Romanian 3rd Infantry Division. By midday, the Romanian 6th Corps had practically ceased to exist as a combat unit. The front collapse was complete. In the afternoon of August 22nd, the Soviet 6th Tank Army had reached as far south as Barlad, halfway toward the FNB line. The German 6th Army in Bessarabia was desperately trying to reach the bridges over the Prut before the Soviets cut them. The German 13th Panzer Division lost the remainder of its tanks in futile attempts to block the Soviet armored columns. On the night of August 22nd, the crossing over the Prut at Ungheni fell into Soviet hands. In Bacău, General Avramescu, fed up with contradictory orders and convinced that Antonescu might again be dissuaded by the Germans from ordering withdrawal, submitted his resignation at 8:45 p.m. He did not wait for a response. Without transmitting German orders to his subordinates, he left them to continue the nighttime retreat. On August 23rd, when the sun rose over Moldavia, Army Group South Ukraine had largely disintegrated. Mixed German and Romanian units with soldiers on bicycles, on horseback, in horse-drawn carts, and on foot desperately searched for escape routes westward across the Siret River or south toward the FNB line. Panic was written on everyone's faces and gestures. The fear of not reaching the bridge in time, recalled a Romanian anti-aircraft second lieutenant trapped in the rout near Tecuci. The Palace coup. August 23, 1944. While the front was collapsing, a 22-year-old king in Bucharest was setting in motion the most audacious plan of his life. Michael I of Romania had begun distancing himself from Antonescu after Stalingrad. During 1943 and the early months of 1944, the monarch strengthened his contacts with leaders of the banned historical parties, the National Peasants' Party of Iuliu Maniu and the National Liberal Party of George Bratianu, and built a small circle of military conspirators loyal to him, mostly officers of the royal household or generals removed from active service by Antonescu. In parallel, Maniu had maintained contact since 1940 with the British Special Operations Executive, trying unsuccessfully to convince the Western Allies to negotiate directly with the Romanian opposition. The response from Washington and London was always the same. They had to deal with Moscow. This restriction deeply shaped the king's calculations. If the Western Allies would not intervene in the Balkans, and the Allied deception operations designed to make Hitler believe in a possible landing in the region were exactly that, a deception, then Romania could not expect Americans or British troops to arrive before the Soviets. What Michael I of Romania could do was try to extract the best possible armistice terms from negotiations inevitably conducted with Moscow, and do so before Romanian territory was completely occupied by the Red Army while still having something to bargain with. The military core of the plan was Colonel Dumitru Damasianu, Chief of Staff of the Capital Military Command, which controlled about 7,000 soldiers, police officers, and support units in Bucharest and its surroundings. Damasianu had the capability to seal city access points, occupy key communication and transport nodes, and neutralize German units scattered in the capital before they could organize. Without him, the coup was impossible. He was also the man who had asked for 5 days to be ready when the king presented the plan on August 20th. The front collapse did not leave that time. Another pillar of the conspiracy circle was General Constantine Sănătescu, head of the king's military household since 1943. Antonescu had placed him in that position precisely to keep Mihai I informed about military affairs, but politically isolated, not realizing he was delivering to the monarch an officer with access to classified information and contacts throughout the high command. Sănătescu put the king in contact with retired General Gheorghe Mihail, former chief of the General Staff, and retired General Aurel Aldea. Both had been removed from active service by Antonescu due to their ties to the circle of King Carol II and their distance from the regime. The original coup plan was elegantly simple and depended on concentrating the Romanian response within a few hours. Antonescu and his deputy prime minister would be invited to an audience with the king. If the conducator rejected the armistice demand, he would be arrested. The king would appoint a new government that would immediately announce the cessation of hostilities against the USSR and demand the withdrawal of German forces from Romanian territory. Simultaneously, Romanian representatives in Cairo, where a diplomatic channel with the Western Allies already existed, would sign the armistice. The king would send a personal telegram to General Henry Maitland Wilson, Supreme Allied Commander of the Mediterranean Theatre, requesting air attacks on German targets around Bucharest and the interdiction of railway lines through which German reinforcements could arrive from Hungary, Bulgaria, and Yugoslavia. Technical details of the telegram to Wilson occupied several members of the conspiratorial circle during the night of August 21st to 22nd. The cipher service of the Foreign Ministry, working in offices relocated to Snagov to escape American bombing, spent hours encoding the message with precise map references of the air targets the king requested to be attacked. It was meticulous, high-pressure work carried out in absolute secrecy in an office where any employee could be an informant of the regime's security apparatus. On August 22nd, when Antonescu announced he would return to the front the next day before briefly coming back to Bucharest, the conspirators accelerated the timetable. Damasianu was informed that he would have hours, not days. The colonel replied that he would do what he could. The contingency plan, originally designed for 5 days, had to be executed with the forces available at that moment. At 3 p.m. on August 23, 1944, in the suffocating heat of the royal palace halls, Marshal Ion Antonescu arrived slightly late, as was his habit, at the royal residence Casa Nua. Deputy Prime Minister Mihai Antonescu was already present together with General Sănătescu in the waiting salon. Two officers loyal to the monarch took position at the foot of the stairs. Three non-commissioned officers waited in an adjacent corridor. The king asked the conducator for a report on the front situation. Antonescu admitted that the Soviets had broken through the lines in Moldavia and Bessarabia, but insisted that the army was to blame because it had not fought with sufficient hardness, and that the political opposition had undermined troop morale through defeatist propaganda. It was the same argument he had used after Stalingrad, the same logic refusing to recognize that the problem was not willingness to fight, but the balance of forces. Michael I of Romania asked him directly whether he did not believe the time had come to conclude an armistice. Antonescu listed his conditions. He needed to notify Hitler before any action, obtain Allied guarantees that German troops would withdraw without harassment, ensure that Romanian civil administration would continue without interruption, that there would be no territorial changes until a peace conference, and that the Romanian government would have an inviolable district as its seat. Antonescu replied that Romania had hours, not days or weeks, to decide. Deputy Prime Minister Mihai Antonescu, more pragmatic than the Marshal, asked for at least a couple of days to receive responses from Romanian diplomatic contacts in Turkey. Antonescu repeated that there was no such time. The king asked Antonescu to relinquish power to someone willing to sign the armistice without prior conditions. The Marshal rejected this vehemently. He declared that he would defend the Foxani Pass with all available reserves, and that if that failed, he would organize a final resistance in the mountain massifs of southern Transylvania. It was the position of a man who still believed, or pretended to believe, that catastrophe could be reversed by willpower. "If that is the situation, there is nothing more to be done," said Michael Watand. It was the agreed phrase. The captains stationed outside the room entered with 3 soldiers, saluted the conducator, and then requested that he accompany them, taking him by the arm. Antonescu froze. "What does this mean?" There was a second of general paralysis. Then the king's aide from the doorway shouted to the soldiers, "Carry out your orders." The marshal was taken upstairs together with the deputy prime minister. Both were locked inside the enormous safe embedded in the wall where King Carol II had kept his postage stamp collection. It was a piece of banking engineering with steel walls several centimeters thick, well ventilated, with enough space for 2 men but absolutely inescapable from the inside. The escort of the conducator, parked in front of the building less than 100 meters from the German Gestapo headquarters in Bucharest, was invited into the palace under the pretext of escaping the heat. Once inside, it was disarmed and detained. The efficiency of this maneuver was critical. If the escorts had been able to raise the alarm immediately, the Germans would have had 2 or 3 additional hours to organize their response. In the following hours, the conspirators systematically dismantled the regime's apparatus. Interior Minister Dumitru Popescu was summoned by a fake call in Antonescu's name and arrested upon arrival. Defense Minister General Constantine Pantazi was detained in the same way. The Bucharest prefect and the commander of the gendarmerie also fell into the trap. The head of the Romanian Secret Intelligence Service, Siguranta, Eugen Cristescu, was the only one who suspected in time. When they asked him to speak directly with Antonescu by phone and the conducator did not appear on the line, Cristescu refused to attend the meeting and went directly to alert the German legation. The legation was operating with reduced personnel that afternoon. The ambassador, Baron Manfred von Killinger, a veteran of the German Freikorps period of political assassinations in the 1920s, appointed ambassador to Bucharest in 1941, was out of town. The acting councillor gathered the 3 heads of the German military missions of the Army, Luftwaffe, and Navy. They decided to call von Killinger, inform Berlin, and wait for instructions. They took no immediate initiative, which gave the Romanian conspirators several additional hours of advantage. Meanwhile, in the royal palace, General Antonescu received the official appointment as Prime Minister of the new National Unity Government. Leaders of the political opposition, Maniu of the National Peasants' Party, Gheorghe Bratianu of the National Liberal Party, Titul Petrescu of Social Democracy, and Lucreciu Patrascanu, had been summoned to the audience and were to provide the king with an agreed list of ministers. None of them showed up. Maniu was not locatable. Bratianu had panicked at the possibility that the coup might fail and decided to stay away until the result was known. Patrascanu did attend and was the only party leader present during the critical hours. Antonescu had to improvise a government of generals, to which Michael I insisted on adding the 4 opposition leaders as ministers without portfolio, even without their prior consent. At 10:25 p.m., the voice of King Michael I was heard on Romanian radio across the country and in frontline positions wherever a receiver existed. He announced the end of the alliance with the Axis powers, the immediate cessation of hostilities against Soviet, American and British forces, and the formation of a national unity government under General Antonescu. He repeatedly mentioned the Soviet Union, Britain and the United States together at the same level, to soften the psychological impact of making peace with the enemy. Romanian soldiers had been fighting for more than 3 years. The BBC monitoring service captured the speech and distributed it as top news half an hour later. In Allied headquarters in Naples, Algiers and Moscow, teleprinters began transmitting the Romanian speech text. The news took Moscow completely by surprise. Stavka had no prior information about the coup, and Generals Rodion Malinovsky and Fyodor Tolbukin received instructions to continue the offensive as if nothing had changed until new orders arrived. During the following 48 hours, Romanian soldiers who surrendered or tried to switch sides at the front were treated as prisoners of war in most sectors. The reaction at the front was chaotic and contradictory. Many Romanian soldiers had no access to a radio receiver. Those who heard the king's speech faced an unprecedented decision. Their official orders, coming from a chain of command that no longer existed, said one thing. The monarch's voice on the radio told them another. A Romanian battalion that had broken a Soviet encirclement on the Yasi front found itself at dawn encountering a German battalion that was also retreating. They exchanged information about the coup. The second lieutenant who left the testimony of that encounter recalled that, "We stood stunned. I could not understand why my superiors had abandoned us." His unit decided to follow its own path and was captured shortly after by Soviet patrols. Transylvania and the price of the Armistice, September to December 1944. On September 5, 1944, the Hungarian Second Army launched a counter-offensive from northern Transylvania toward the south, attempting to seize the key Carpathian mountain passes before Soviet forces arrived. The Hungarian Second Corps advanced from Cluj toward the southeast. The Hungarian 2nd Armored Division attacked through the center, and the 8th SS Cavalry Division pushed from Târgu Mureș toward the southwest. The objective was to seize the Vulcan and Turnu Rosu passes, the natural access routes from the south into the Transylvanian plateau. Romanian border guards withdrew, ceding up to 40 kilometers of territory. The training divisions forming the Romanian 6th Territorial Corps and 6th Army Corps, composed mostly of young recruits with minimal training, began arriving and digging defensive positions along the Mureș River. But the critical element was the Romanian Mechanized Corps, the last strategic reserve the General Staff had managed to assemble. The 8th Motorized Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, and the 9th Infantry Division, plus the improvised armoured detachment from Ploiești equipped with French and Czechoslovak origin tanks. On September 6th, the Hungarian 2nd Armoured Division broke through the front at Ludas in the centre of the Romanian line, forcing the Romanian 6th Corps to retreat to the Tarnava Mica River. The 8th SS Cavalry Division advanced on the right flank, but the Romanian Mechanized Corps launched an immediate counterattack. By September 7th, the line had stabilized. On September 8th, the Romanians went on the offensive along the entire front and within 4 days pushed the Hungarian Second Army back across the Mur River. Soviet forces began flowing into southern Transylvania from the south, while continuing penetration into northern Transylvania from the east. The Soviet-Romanian armistice was signed in Moscow on September 12, 1944, when Romania was already completely occupied by Soviet forces. The document was harsh. 20 articles obliging Romania to provide 12 divisions to fight against Nazi Germany, to cede northern Bukovina and Bessarabia to the USSR, to repatriate Soviet prisoners of war, to pay occupation costs, to pay reparations worth $300 million, to prosecute Romanian war criminals, to allow Soviet censorship, and to dissolve fascist-type groups. The only visible concession was the promise, not guaranteed, to return northern Transylvania or most of it to Romania. Rodion Malinovsky established the Soviet Allied Control Commission over Romania under Soviet command after being promoted to Marshal 2 days earlier, together with Fyodor Tolbukin, in recognition of the success of the Second Yasi Chisinau offensive. Marshal Ion Antonescu was transferred to Moscow under Soviet custody. Baron Manfred von Killinger chose not to fall into Soviet hands. He shot his secretary and then committed suicide. In the following months, the Romanian army, now under operational command of the Second Ukrainian Front, fought in Hungary and Czechoslovakia against the Wehrmacht. It was one of the strangest turns of the entire war. The same Romanian soldiers who in 1941 had advanced alongside the Germans now fought them on Hungarian and Czechoslovak territory. The cost was high. Only in operations from August 1944 until the end of the war did Romania lose tens of thousands of additional men. Northern Transylvania was formally returned to Romania after the end of the war, in partial fulfillment of the Soviet promise. Bessarabia and northern Bukovina were not. They remained within the borders of the USSR and would not return to Romanian state control until the independence of the Republic of Moldova in 1991. What Romania sacrificed and what it never recovered. The Second Yasi Chisinau offensive was, in the words of historian Grant T. Harwood, an unqualified disaster for Nazi Germany. Not only did the army group South Ukraine collapse under the blows of the Second and Third Ukrainian fronts, but Romania's fall deprived the Reich of its most important Eastern Front ally and its principal fuel source. German panzer forces participating in the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, the last major German attack in the West, depended partly on fuel reserves accumulated before the loss of the Romanian oil fields. The Battle of the Bulge failed, among other reasons, because German tanks ran out of gasoline halfway through the advance. The scale of Romanian sacrifice in the Second World War is difficult to grasp in a single figure. At its peak in November 1942, the Romanian army had 464,000 soldiers on the Eastern Front. Throughout the war, total losses, dead, wounded, and prisoners, are estimated at more than 700,000 men. No other Axis ally except Finland, with 500,000 soldiers but on a much more limited front and with more restricted objectives, contributed so many men. But Romania's legacy in the war cannot be separated from the Holocaust. Approximately 300,000 Jews died in territories under Romanian control. The International Commission for the Study of the Holocaust in Romania, known as the Wiesel Commission in honor of Elie Wiesel, who chaired it, determined in its 2004 report that Romania was the only Axis country other than Germany itself that independently conducted large-scale Jewish massacre operations. The Yasi Pogrom, the Odessa massacre, and the Transnistria camps all were Romanian crimes, not German operations imposed on a reluctant population. The coup of August 23, 1944, complicates this narrative further. King Michael I of Romania probably saved tens of thousands of Romanian lives by preventing the country from becoming a battlefield where the Romanian army would have been completely destroyed. Historian Harwood notes that, although it is unlikely that the army group South Ukraine could have held the FNB line for long had Antonescu remained, Romanian reserves would have been thrown into combat, the Soviet advance would have been slower, and the destruction of German retreating forces would have been more bloody. But Michael I paid a devastating personal price. The Armistice did not provide the conditions he expected. The Americans and British did not act as a counterweight to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Allied Control Commission in Romania was controlled almost exclusively by the Soviets. The Romanian Communist Party, a minor party without significant social base before 1944, rose to power supported by Soviet occupation forces. By late 1947, 3 years after the coup that saved Romania from greater destruction, King Michael I was forced to abdicate and sent into exile. He would not return to his country until decades later, when communism had already fallen. The debate over August 23, 1944 remains intense in Romania. Communists turned it into a national holiday, but rewrote history by attributing the merit to the Communist Party. After the fall of communism in 1989, the narrative changed again. Some celebrate it as an act of courage that shortened the war, others denounce it as a betrayal that delivered the country to Stalin. The reality is that both are true at the same time. It was an act that saved lives and simultaneously could not prevent Romania from passing from a fascist dictatorship to a communist dictatorship. On the northeastern battlefields of Romania in Moldavia, traces of trenches are still visible in forests where tractors never reached to plough the land. In places such as the outskirts of Târgu Neamt, concrete bunkers from Axis defensive lines slowly crumble among vegetation. In the military cemeteries of Moldavian villages lie Romanians, Soviets and Germans in uneasy proximity. Since the fall of communism, most local monuments bear Orthodox crosses with inscriptions that sometimes mention the struggle against atheistic communism, without cleanly separating the dead of 1941 to 1944 from those of 1944 to 1945, as if Romania's history in that conflict were impossible to narrate in two separate times. Perhaps because it is impossible. The same soldier who fought the Soviets in 1942 fought the Germans in 1944. The same army that participated in the Holocaust carried out the coup that allowed the Allies to advance toward Berlin. This is the history that textbooks rarely tell, that of an ally who believed in what it was doing, who sacrificed more men than any other on the German side, who participated in documented war crimes, and who at the end, in a desperate act of self-preservation, switched sides late enough for the world to remember it only as a victim of the Cold War and early enough for some to call it a hero.